Baby Emmanuel Haro did not go missing on August 14th, as the world was told. Prosecutors now allege that he had been dead for 9 days before that frantic 911 call was ever made. 9 days where his parents knew the truth, but the community was chasing a lie. What began as a mother's desperate story of a parking lot abduction in Yucaipa quickly unraveled into something far darker. Surveillance footage revealed no kidnapper. Witnesses saw no struggle, and when investigators pressed harder, the narrative collapsed. The heartbreaking truth is this: Emmanuel never had a chance to be found alive, because by the time the world was searching for him, he was already gone. At just 7 months old, prosecutors say Emmanuel endured a lifetime of abuse in his short existence. And while neighbors searched fields, while flyers were posted on walls, and while prayers were whispered into the night, Emmanuel's reality had already been sealed. He was not missing, he was failed. Failed by his parents, failed by the justice system that let danger return to his doorstep, and failed by a society that now asks itself, how many warnings were ignored? This is the story of how a baby's death was hidden behind a false kidnapping, how his parents were charged with murder, and how 9 lost days stand as a chilling symbol of silence, denial, and systemic failure. But before we dive into this, kindly subscribe to our channel if you believe in fighting for justice, because every view, every comment, every subscriber is a stand against silence and a step toward justice. We've just crossed 5,000 subscribers, all because of your support, and we need that same energy to reach 6,000, then 7,000, and then 10,000. So go ahead and drop your fingerprints on that subscribe button, and definitely where you're watching from, because wherever you are, the day this vision is fulfilled, I will send my appreciation straight to you. Let's keep building this community that stands and fights for justice together. The world was told baby Emmanuel Haro was snatched in broad daylight, but prosecutors now say the truth is even darker. Emmanuel wasn't kidnapped, he wasn't alive. In fact, he had been dead for 9 days before anyone ever reported him missing. 9 days, that number should shake us. Because while the community rallied, while neighbors prayed, while strangers hung posters and searched fields, Emmanuel's parents already knew there was no child to save. The story that brought hundreds together was built on a lie, and the trust that was broken runs deeper than words can describe. This isn't just the story of a missing child, it's the story of betrayal, of a public misled, of investigators deceived, and most of all, of a baby whose short life was marked not by love, but by suffering. Prosecutors now allege Emmanuel endured severe abuse in the very home meant to protect him. And when his tiny body gave out, when his life was cut short at just 7 months old, instead of truth, a false kidnapping was staged to cover up the crime. Tonight, we step into the heartbreaking reality behind the headlines. The fabricated kidnapping, the history of violence, and the systemic failures that may have sealed Emmanuel's fate long before his story reached the public. Because this isn't just about one child's death, it's about the silence that allowed it to happen. August 14th, 2025. A frantic 911 call echoes from the parking lot of a Big 5 sporting goods store in Yucaipa, California. On the other end of the line, 41-year-old Rebecca Haro. Her voice is urgent, panicked. She tells dispatchers she had been attacked, knocked unconscious, and that when she came to her 7-month-old son, Emmanuel was gone. Within hours, her story spread like wildfire. A baby taken in broad daylight, it was every parent's nightmare. Police rushed to the scene, helicopters swept the skies, K-9 units scoured the ground. Neighbors joined hands with strangers, combing through fields, alleys, and side streets, desperate to find any trace of the missing infant. The community's hope was simple: bring Emmanuel home. But while the search grew louder, the silence in the evidence became impossible to ignore. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses showed no struggle, no attacker, no frantic mother collapsing to the pavement. Witnesses in the area, shoppers, passers-by, employees, saw nothing unusual. And the timeline Rebecca gave investigators didn't fit. It bent, it cracked, and then it broke. The streets were flooded with searchers, but Emmanuel was already gone, buried in silence and lies. Every footprint in the dirt, every flyer taped to a window, every prayer whispered into the night was chasing a story that never happened. It didn't take long for cracks to form in Rebecca Haro's story. Investigators reviewing the details noticed something unsettling: the pieces didn't fit. Her version of events changed in subtle ways, shifting under pressure. The timing of her phone call, the description of the attack, the sequence of what she claimed happened, none of it lined up. Surveillance cameras, placed around the parking lot and neighboring businesses, were the first to betray the lie. They didn't show a frantic struggle. They didn't capture a shadowy figure carrying away a baby. In fact, they showed nothing that supported Rebecca's desperate account of that morning. It was as if the abduction existed only in words, not in reality. Then came the silence. As investigators pressed harder, Rebecca's cooperation faltered. She stopped answering questions. She pulled away from the very search she had sparked. The mother who had once painted herself as a victim now stood in the center of suspicion. And the community, the same people who had spent days searching for Emmanuel, began to feel the weight of betrayal. How could a child's disappearance, the one thing that had united neighbors and strangers, turn out to be nothing but a story? This wasn't a desperate mother begging for her son's life. This was a cover-up unfolding in real time. On August 22nd, just over a week after Emmanuel was reported missing, the case took a chilling turn. Authorities descended on the Haro family home in Cabazon. Inside, they arrested both parents, 32-year-old Jake Haro and 41-year-old Rebecca Haro. The charges were damning: murder and filing a false police report. At first, the community waited for answers, still hoping Emmanuel might be found alive. But then came the revelation that shattered every last thread of hope. Prosecutors announced that Emmanuel hadn't been kidnapped at all. He had been dead for 9 days before his disappearance was ever reported. 9 days. That means while the world searched, Emmanuel's parents knew the truth. While posters went up, his tiny body was already gone. While volunteers combed fields and officers deployed helicopters, Emmanuel's reality had already been sealed. While hope burned, the truth was being buried. This was no abduction. This was a carefully crafted lie, designed to buy time, to mislead investigators, and to hide what prosecutors now call a lifetime of abuse in just 7 months of life. When prosecutors laid out their case, their words were haunting. Emmanuel, they said, did not simply die. He endured what they described as a lifetime of severe abuses crammed into his 7 short months on Earth. Bruises told a story long before the false kidnapping ever made headlines. Evidence suggested patterns of neglect, of malnutrition, of a baby whose cries were not met with comfort but with violence. A child who should have known safety in the arms of his parents, instead learned pain from their hands. Investigators believe that Emmanuel's body bore the marks of suffering that no infant should ever have to endure. 7 months old, and already his short life was filled with more pain than most endure in a lifetime. 7 months to smile for the first time, to try and sit up, to babble sounds of innocence. But instead, Emmanuel's milestones were measured in bruises, in hunger, in silence that was ignored until it was too late. This wasn't a sudden tragedy. This was a slow collapse of protection, a baby slipping through the cracks of the very systems designed to protect him. And when his tiny body could no longer endure the weight of that abuse, his death was not met with confession, but with lies. To understand the tragedy of Emmanuel Haro, you have to look back, years before he was even born. In 2018, his father, Jake Haro, stood accused of something no child should ever endure. His infant daughter, just weeks old at the time, was rushed to a hospital with catastrophic injuries, fractured ribs, a shattered skull, and bleeding on the brain. The violence left her permanently disabled. Today, she remains bedridden with cerebral palsy, a life sentence of suffering handed down before she could even speak her first words. And yet, despite the overwhelming evidence, despite the devastation inflicted on a newborn, Jake Haro never saw the inside of a prison cell. Instead, in 2023, he struck a plea deal. The sentence, probation and just 180 days of work release. Half a year of nights away from home, and then freedom. No prison term, no accountability equal to the crime. Riverside County District Attorney Michael Hestron would later describe that decision as nothing less than a sentencing breakdown. In his words, it was a failure so severe that it directly contributed to Emmanuel's death. Justice failed one child, and as a result, it failed Emmanuel too. Because had the system done its job, had it recognized the danger, had it kept Jake Haro away from infants, then Emmanuel might still be alive. Instead, history repeated itself, and another child paid the price. Perhaps the cruelest part of this tragedy is not just Emmanuel's suffering, but the false hope that consumed an entire community. For days, volunteers poured out of their homes, people who had never met Emmanuel, never spoken to his parents, yet gave their time, their energy, and their hearts. They combed through fields and parking lots. They searched side streets and alleys. They believed they were racing against the clock to save a baby's life. Helicopters roared overhead. K-9 units traced scents through the dirt. Mothers clutched their own children a little tighter, whispering silent prayers for one they had never held. The town of Yucaipa became united in purpose, bring Emmanuel home, and through every passing hour, hope flickered, fragile but still alive. But in reality, they weren't searching for a missing child. They were chasing a lie. The truth had already been buried days earlier, hidden beneath a fabricated story. And all the love, all the prayers, all the desperate hours spent walking those fields were built on nothing but deception. Every flyer printed, every prayer whispered, every tear shed, they were all built on a story meant to deceive. And in the end, the community was not only grieving Emmanuel's loss, but also the betrayal that their compassion had been manipulated for a cover-up. On August 26, just days after their arrest, prosecutors moved forward with formal charges. Both Jake and Rebecca Haro were indicted on first-degree murder. Alongside that, they faced misdemeanor charges for filing a false police report, the fabricated kidnapping that misled an entire community. Bail was set at $1 million each. Their arraignment, a date that now looms heavy with expectation, was scheduled for September 4th. As the legal process unfolds, Jake Haro has already begun speaking from behind bars. In a recent jailhouse interview, he denied any long-term abuse of Emmanuel. He painted himself not as a violent man, but as a misunderstood father. And he went further, defending Rebecca, the mother accused of weaving the kidnapping story. To him, their tragedy was being twisted by prosecutors, and his past was being used against him. But denial is not evidence. Words are not truth, and silence is not innocence. The evidence, prosecutors insist, tells a story far darker than any statement Jake Haro can offer. A story of abuse, deception, and a cover-up that left a baby without a voice, and a community without the truth. The courtroom will decide Jake and Rebecca Haro's fate. But this case has already exposed something far larger, a system that broke down long before Emmanuel's final breath. In 2018, Jake brutally assaulted his infant daughter, an act so violent it left her permanently disabled. Yet instead of years behind bars, he walked free with probation and work release. That failure of sentencing wasn't just a mistake. Prosecutors now call it a direct thread that led to Emmanuel's death. But the justice system wasn't the only wall that crumbled. There were neighbors who saw signs of neglect, yet stayed silent. There were red flags that went ignored by those tasked with protecting children. And there was a broader culture of looking the other way, until tragedy forced everyone to confront the cost of inaction. District Attorney Mike Hestron's words cut deep. The system broke down. Emmanuel wasn't just failed by his parents. He was failed by every wall meant to protect him, from the courts to child protective services, to the very society that allowed warning signs to blur into background noise. In the end, those cracks became the space where abuse thrived. And in that silence, Emmanuel was left defenseless. As Emmanuel's story enters the courts, the world waits for justice. But justice in a courtroom will never bring back the 7 short months that he endured. It will never erase the bruises, the hunger, the silence of a baby whose cries went unheard. Emmanuel Haro is gone. Not because he was kidnapped in some parking lot, but because abuse was allowed to thrive in plain sight. This case is not just about two parents on trial. It is about all of us, neighbors who hesitate to speak up, systems that fail to act, institutions that choose leniency over protection. Emmanuel was betrayed by every hand that should have shielded him. And the truth is, if the world forgets him, if we move on as though this never happened, then the cycle will repeat. Another child will be lost, another name will fade into headlines, and another small life will be stolen by silence. So I leave you with this: remember Emmanuel. Remember that his short life, marked by pain and covered by lies, is now a warning written in tragedy. Ask yourself, if you saw the signs, if you heard the cries, would you act? Or would you look away? Because Emmanuel Haro didn't just need parents, he needed protectors. He needed all of us. And in his absence, the question remains: the next time a child's life hangs in the balance, will we do better? Or will we fail again? If Emmanuel's story shook you, don't let it fade into another forgotten headline. His life, 7 months of pain, must not be in vain. Share his story. Speak his name. And most importantly, refuse to look away the next time a child's safety feels uncertain. One call, one question, one act of courage could mean the difference between life and death. Let's keep building this community that refuses to stop asking the hardest question of all: but why? Why was Emmanuel failed? Why was justice delayed? Why do children continue to slip through the cracks? And how do we make sure it never happens again? If you believe no child should ever suffer in silence, stand with us. Subscribe, stay with this fight, and lend your voice to those who cannot speak. Because silence protects no one. But together our voices can protect the next Emmanuel.